Welcome to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brian Griffith, and here's what's going down this week in your backyard and across the world. For this segment, we are once again joined by Marina Roberts and Maddie Detelich of the Austin Democratic Socialists of America for our segment on housing. Thank you both for coming on the show.
I am so impressed by your chipper, your ability to summon a chipper introduction, given how exhausted we all are. Hey, it's great to see you. It's great to be on the show.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having us.
All right. Yeah, we had my secret has finally been exposed. I'm a totally different person, right? When the cameras, when the mics start rolling, I don't know if there's a version for the camera start rolling.
You're a star, Brian.
We're always looking to optimize those search engines and whatnot. We're all about the SEO, so naturally we're going to be talking about the things that we think will bring in the most clickbait, as opposed to the most important issues. So we're going to be talking about the yeah. We're going to be talking about the specifically the kind of Green New Deal and how that kind of intersects with housing issues. I actually think that's a very important subject because I've found naturally that my show in the past, especially a couple months, has veered more toward environmental issues. And that's not sort of a conscious decision on my part. That's simply because we've had so many environmental catastrophes. We've had so much kind of going on that kind of either near misses or actual hits. The near misses, you could say in some ways the Deer Park fire, for instance, the major chemical fire that hit Houston recently, or the actual hits being the major hurricanes that have just totally destroyed entire cities. So in this way, when we talk about something like housing, we cannot necessarily divorce that in any way whatsoever from environmentalism or from, just kind of other social and economic justice issues such as racism and whatnot. So I think it makes sense at this kind of particular point to focus on the environmental aspect of when we're talking about housing justice, when we're talking about how do we get people in good homes, in homes that they can afford. I hate to use the term affordable because that's so loaded in housing. But yeah, these two intersect, and there's this article from a Jacobin that y'all brought me that kind of goes through like how this Green New Deal intersects with public housing proposal in the U.S. So yeah, maybe we can start there and just like what is the connection here?
Sure. Yeah, I have been thinking a lot more in my work about sort of the more structural side of this. So I think that whenever you're talking about the intersection between housing and the environment, there's a lot of sort of like low-hanging fruit there, like the construction of housing, constructing single-family homes, I think, produces a ton of environmental waste. There are ways that we can construct houses to be more environmentally friendly. So, solar panels and better insulation and a lot of stuff like that. But for me, I think that where we move from, like deleting text files on our computer to like actually, making space on the hard drive is like looking at the structural planning side of it. So my co-chair in the housing committee now, after Maddie departed, is a woman named Stephanie Webb. And she made this observation to me about how people hate traffic. People get really mad about traffic. But if you think about it, traffic is a housing issue. Because if you've got a Whataburger in, close to downtown, where can any of those employees afford to live on the wages that they're paid? Right? Like nowhere. They have to live very far. So if you limit the solution to traffic as being like, oh, we need to look at public transit, and you stop there, then you wind up with, rail lines that just go further and further out from the city center. And you don't actually address the fact that people are on a daily basis having to move, sometimes dozens of miles in order to get to the place where they earn a wage. So I'm really, really interested in kind of what a little bit of what the Jacobin article gets into in terms of just building cities, more densely, and how we can try to do that by leaving it to the market, which is just going to create, luxury condos, or we can have it be public housing. And I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah, so I think traffic would be a good place to dive in. So I think this Jacobin piece is definitely worth a read. Daniel Aldana Cohen, an assistant professor of sociology at University of Pennsylvania, wrote it for Jacobin, and he also did a podcast talking about interviewed on the Dig. Also, if you don't have time to read but have some ear space and want to check that out. Okay, plugs over. Yeah, during your long commutes. Exactly. So I think he does a good job, or they do a good job of getting into the different elements here, and like stressing how housing and climate justice really can't be disentangled, because there are these like things that are, there's so many like reinforcing elements, and traffic is one big component, or commuting is one big component. So when you look at U.S. energy use or U.S. emissions, in the U.S. in particular, it's a little bit lower globally, but because the U.S. was built for cars, our transportation emissions are about a third of all of our carbon emissions. So, and yeah, I mean, just we could go a long way in reducing those if people weren't commuting these horrendous commutes. And it feels like every day you hear a story about like, oh, people in California are driving 2 hours now to get to work. Like, and it's not getting any better on its own. And it's just, and yeah, so I'm in an environmental engineering program, and yeah, just kind of on a regular basis, I'm just hearing all of these conversations about, oh yeah, well, we need to improve the energy efficient, or the efficiency of our vehicles, like more miles per gallon, or even better yet, let's make them all electric.
Yeah,
let's electrify our fleet. And then it's just like, yeah, why is it easier to imagine that like in a year, or because of course quick action is kind of the elephant in the room here. Why is it easier to imagine for people like that we'll just instantly improve our technology, and not to mention swap out all of the cars on the road? Like, that's going to be easy to pass in their current, like, easier to imagine that than imagining like any number of but like what Marina was saying, it is housing, like letting people live where their lives are, like,
oh yeah,
such a big component.
Well, you say, this is a kind of thing that won't get better on its own, but I don't think we've tried the real solution here of giving Elon Musk $500 billion yet.
We haven't tried that.
If we just keep funneling money into these Silicon Valley technocrats.
Thank you, Brian, for saying.
Thank you for saying what we were all hoping.
What is the phrase now? Sharing the tea.
No, though I think that really hits on something that is very important, and that's that idea of looking at sort of the systemic issues of something like traffic, for instance, as opposed to kind of blaming individual people, because I know as with so many other people, I'm also in that kind of boat of having to drive kind of long distances generally, even to get to this radio station, but also just to get to different work sites. I've worked at places where I have to like kind of drive to a different place each week. I've also, kind of worked the kind of gig economy stuff where it's like every new gig, the, next $10 I make over here is like 5 or 10 miles away in the city. And, I've also just worked kind of day jobs that are far away because our cities are not structured in a way that really is sustainable for everyone. And it's not just about traffic. It's also about kind of food deserts and whatnot. Yeah. It's about so many people don't have access to, in the meantime, where people don't have jobs in their own neighborhoods, people also, something that could create these jobs, such as, again, like sort of a supermarket with, food and produce and whatnot, may not necessarily be considered like economically viable in communities that are farther away from the commercial hub of like a downtown city. So it's like so much of this is really built in a way that's, it's the kind of quote unquote anarchy of the free market. It's not built for any sort of sustainability whatsoever. You know, if I could take a bus or otherwise take like public transportation to everywhere I could get to, I would, but I can't, as with so many other people, because at the same time that we're seeing like these, you know, just the sprawl of these kind of developments that are not built for the sustainable future, we're also seeing the cutback of these public transportation. So it really just, it all feeds into each other in so many ways.
Yeah. I think it's just, I like that you brought that up, because I think it's important when you're talking any kind of environmental politics to stress that we're not trying to bop people over the head for not being good stewards of the earth. And yeah, I mean, that's what's so exciting about the Green New Deal, that it is this like big, God, did I say the word innovative? Like forward-looking, imaginative vision that's like a positive vision for how the world could be better while we're tackling this greatest challenge to potentially to ever face humanity. And instead of just like, oh, you need to take the bus, or oh, you need to stop using straws. But like, yeah, like, I mean, environmentalists and leftists in general have been kind of maligned for being the people who are like telling people to not be free. But yeah, I mean, if we start the Green New Deal is cool because, yeah, it's this imaginative, positive vision of the future. And then we can take that and use it as a starting point to be like, okay, and then like, let's actually talk about real freedom, because is it really free that you can't actually go anywhere like when you want to go places, and when you do, you have to get into a car? And what if I'll just air my grievances on air right now. I'm totally broke and I have a flat tire right now, and it's like, I really don't like imagining going and finding out that I have to replace it because I don't know where I'm going to get that money. So instead, I've just been ignoring the problem. And
also, you can almost see when we're talking about sort of the kind of economic factors, like with something like a car, that need to have a car in a city in order to make money. That's something that is essentially a transfer of like the burden of maintaining capital onto you. So if you were a worker who was able to take the bus or whatnot to work, that's something that you're not like, you're paying for it. You're paying for the tickets or whatnot, but you're not paying for like the upkeep of the bus. You're not. And all of a sudden, when you have a kind of car-centered economy, that burden of maintaining the car is then on you.
Insurance, everything. Like,
it's such a shackle.
It is. It totally is. And I feel like nowhere is that burden more evident on the backs of working class people than in like really rural areas. Because in Austin, you at least kind of vaguely have this option of taking the bus. But whenever I was growing up, I mean, I just knew dozens and dozens and dozens of people in my hometown who just like, if you didn't have a car, you could not get a job. And so if you had kids to feed, then you were just going to be like walking around asking people for odd jobs you could do, or you were literally going to be selling weed out of your trailer. You know, I mean, like, it was just like the limitations that places on your opportunities is just like, you can't understate it. It's infuriating. And that's such a good observation, though, that's basically just an externalization of the cost of like maintaining a society onto individual people.
Yeah. And I think we can loop. Oh, sorry. No. I think we can even loop that back. Like you brought up Elon Musk as a joke, but like that is kind of mentioned a little bit in this piece. And it's something that I've thought about for a while. So with the kind of Elon Musk vision of environmentalism, what does he want to do? He wants everyone to drive a Tesla, which their affordable model is $35,000. And also, it seems to be a little bit of a hoax right now, but let's say it's not a hoax. And then,
that's very generous to Elon Musk, but you know.
Yeah. But yeah, and then like this whole like power walls and like prioritizing solar on everyone's roof. And like, don't get me wrong, like I've done some of the rough numbers of like how much solar we would need to actually make a dent in our energy use, and like you do kind of need it everywhere, like, and so rooftop is great, but like what happens when we maintain this current system and all the rich people get solar, and then all of a sudden people are like, oh, we don't actually need to fund public utilities that much. Maybe we can like cut the corners a little bit. And then we're getting to a point where it is like the bus service, where that cost was passed on to the individual, and then the people that are forced to stay on the collective good are just squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until the service is intermittent and not going to where people need to go, and
it's just in shambles. Like, it's not functional anymore.
So it's like, I don't like that vision of the future. And if everyone that can afford it gets an electric vehicle, and then what if I don't want to speculate on, but it's just like,
no, I think you're raising a lot of very good points there, and when we talk about something, going kind of Austin specific here, though I think these things have popped up in kind of every major city at this point. There are so many of these so-called quote unquote solutions to transportation issues. This has become so much more about transportation. And how
I know. We'll get back to the public housing in a minute. Like we're going on a
it's related. You can't talk about housing without also understanding transportation. That's just so when we're talking about transportation, so many of these quote unquote fixes to transportation that are devised by these Silicon Valley companies and these kind of technocrats and whatnot, they're not solutions for a societal level. They're not a societal fix for something like, for instance, these scooters. Yep. The bane of everybody's existence, the scooters that are just left everywhere throughout Austin, and at this point probably every kind of major city where the city council has not had the kind of foresight to ban these things. But like whether it's the scooters, whether it's the electric cars, whether
the Google buses,
the Google buses or whatnot. I mean, all of these at some level, they are not a solution for, to use kind of a popularized term, the 99%. They're not a solution for most people. They're a solution for the kind of ruling class to essentially be able to kind of bridge the gap in the gaps of society they've created. So having taken a city like Austin and essentially destroyed the public transit system, now they found themselves unable to get from point A to point B in a reasonable time in an inconvenient way. So these kind of solutions, the electric car, the self-driving car, the whatnot, those are never going to be affordable for the great population.
Helicopters.
Like drones and whatnot. Like they are like, to me, they exist specifically for these rich people, for these tech bros, to get from whatever awful, kind of $3,000 a month, apartment they live in to wherever it is they work. And it's for them. It's not like, it's not implementable on a grand scale, because like no solution, whether it's housing or whether it's transportation, no solution that leaves this kind of commodity value in place, that considers housing or transportation to be a commodity, is ever going to be able to meet the needs of society in that way. Because these things, as long as it is a commodity, it's going to be out of reach for a certain segment of the population, I feel like.
Absolutely. Like, that's the thing, I think, is that like whenever we talk about the problem with housing in America, the problem is the commodification. The problem is the fact that we have this massive system that's just totally built on 97% of housing being privately owned and having like basically no public housing infrastructure, which is why, getting back around to the housing aspect of this, that's like why this is such a critically important part of the discussion. And I really like the way that the Jacobin article frames it, because they're making it clear that this is not just like, oh, wouldn't it be neat if we kind of talked about housing and environmental justice? They're making it clear that without a robust demand around public housing, like what they're kind of proposing here with 10 million public housing units over the next 10 years, we cannot foreclose the worst cataclysmic outcomes of climate change.
Is that a housing pun?
What?
Was that?
Wow, I didn't actually mean for that, but yes, it was. Thanks. Appreciate it. No, but and also with respect to like the framework of solutions, I think we have to decommodify housing because the upward pressure on rents will always be there. If it's something for rich people to buy and sell and is fundamentally there to make money for rich people and not to house people, not to shelter people. And I think also the fact that we're talking about public housing not being a means-tested, means-restricted thing, something that like, you know, no matter how much income you make, you might want to live in these places because they're just high-quality housing that are like close to the places where you work and live and close to public transit lines. I think that's how you enshrine something in the institutions of American culture, right? That's how you make sure that no matter what, it's going to be protected because everybody is fighting for it. It's not left to the poorest of the poor to defend these institutions. So,
yeah, that's just the stuff of dreams right there. Like one of the in this piece, the author switches like into kind of like first person mode and talks about visiting the Karl Marx Hof in Vienna, the like crown jewel of their public housing. And they're actually like describing themselves tear up when they see like how they have this one classroom that can easily be switched, or like everything in the classroom is on wheels. And so they can easily switch from like an indoor to an outdoor microclimate because there's no AC in Vienna. But when you have these kind of like, when you have housing that's designed with people in mind and like efficiency and affordability. Yeah, I know that
that's
word.
Part of it, like real affordability.
And like people being able to live there and like enjoy living there. Yeah, you're gonna think about how's this gonna feel in the summer, and there are ways to design buildings that are maximizing that are not just solely relying on cranking up the AC to make them livable. So
yeah, I mean, even just from a kind of a historical standpoint, like most housing up until kind of I'd say, I don't know if it was mid 20th century or whatnot, was designed with this more like kind of breathability in mind. Thinking about the specifically like Louisiana, but otherwise found throughout the Deep South, the shotgun houses or whatnot. Like those are designed basically so that like for those who might not be familiar, a shotgun house, obviously the idea is like you can point a shotgun in the house, not that you would generally want to, but you could.
Depends on what kind of day.
Yeah, I guess so. And you'd be able to like basically shoot straight out the back door, like it's a front door to back door, like it's an open airway there. And so like I think like even that need to make sort of air conditioning a commodity, to that kind of need to constantly kind of add these more value-added things that are not necessarily sustainable, because again, everyone wants that comfort without being able to, without necessarily being able to pay the price of what that means when everybody has that. Like it's not a sustainable thing, I guess.
Yeah. That's kind of like on a sort of related note, that's making me think of something. My best friend is also a journalist. His name is Osher Albine, and he interviewed an architect from Dallas. And this architect was discussing something called rewilding, which is kind of the process of reintegrating wildlife and nature into really urban spaces, really urban environments.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that that's a really interesting concept, specifically because there was this quote in there that really like caught my interest. And it was this guy talking about how humans are willing to accept denser patterns if there is more wildlife and greenery integrated into the space. So I think that if we're talking about, like how do we design, how do we like architecturally think of housing and plan it in such a way that it will kind of like maximize human happiness, which I think would be part of the undertaking here, right? If we were really going to do 10 million new public housing units, I think it would be awesome if it was this big sort of national effort to like envision the best thing that housing could be, if we could just integrate more green space, like more trees, more garden rooftops, more community gardens, just stuff like that. I think gives us a lot of like room to dream, kind of, maybe. And that could be really cool, actually.
Yeah, and I think I might also kind of break down the kind of dichotomy there between necessarily like nature and civilization, because I know that kind of comes from a colonial perspective of believing that, like, for instance, the United States or just generally the Americas beforehand were necessarily quote unquote nature. When in reality, if you look at kind of the United States, I think there are so many, or the pre-United States, like the area that we call the Americas today, Turtle Island, I guess, is one of the indigenous names for it, among the many different indigenous names for like those two continents, North America, South America. So much of that was just kind of due to the economic structure and the social structure of indigenous tribes. It was kind of this integration of what we would consider nature with kind of civilization. So like when so much of so much of the quote unquote wilderness was actually like these cultivated forests where, they kind of existed, where game could roam freely, but then, the different tribes that lived in that area could kind of hunt the game. So it's like, it was these naturally cultivated forests in a very kind of interesting way. In our capitalist system as it is, there's no kind of room for that. There's no room for this kind of coexistence of kind of human civilization or human cities with these more kind of green elements, these quote unquote natural elements. Yeah. Because they're in this kind of framework, natural resources are something to be exploited, to be extracted to their maximum value. And so in a city, there's no place for that. In a capitalist city, that is to say, there's no place for that, because a natural resource to a large degree can't be turned into as effective as a commodity as, I don't know, another Starbucks is, or whatever the case is. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who are just tuning in, you are listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. People's Republic originates out of KOOP 91.7 FM Austin, and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are talking with Marina Roberts and Maddie Detelich of Austin Democratic Socialists of America about housing issues, specifically kind of trying to forge the two intersections of the Green New Deal and environmentalism with housing issues here. If we can turn back to the article for a little bit and just sort of understand what the proposal is, because I know the author looks a lot at the kind of Vienna model for public housing as sort of the gold standard, and I'm wondering what it is that he kind of sees in that.
Marina was touching on it a little bit, where it's just this model of housing where it's not this kind of like vision of, oh, we're gonna build some public housing, but it's only for poor people and they have to prove that they're poor, and we're gonna put it in this or we're gonna like concentrate it in this part of town. So like in Vienna, it's integrated throughout the city. In the piece, it mentions that it's a third of the housing is this public housing, and then another third is this cooperative housing, and then only a third is privately owned. Having housing be economically diverse, like, that's an important thing. And it was a topic I know that came up a lot when we were discussing like the housing bond and stuff, because talking about that in our current paradigm gets a little tricky, because we do want money for affordable housing to go to the people that need it the most. But what does that mean, and what kind of like systems are we perpetuating when we're just okay with like, okay, well, we're just going to keep funding this sort of like nonprofit structure of housing justice, where we're just like finding the neediest people. But yeah, so I like when you're talking about something like Vienna, where it has been really successful and everyone loves their housing, and it's beautiful, and it has green spaces, and it's integrated into like what their like recreational activities. Like, it's not it's not silly to think that we should prioritize imagining a housing structure that most people in society actually want, like that people are like proud of, and like that is just like pleasant and wonderful, really, and like magical, and like connecting you with your neighbors, and like where you're seeing people all the time, and where you're gonna. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, yeah, I'm just.
It sounds really exciting to me. And then. But yeah, there's just a really big issue when you're concentrating poverty through building housing projects. And then, of course, the issue with that kind of model of the welfare state is then as soon as it only benefits one segment of society, it's very vulnerable to the other segments of society that have the power, it turns out, to be like, why are we funding this housing program? And so, yeah, currently in America, we have like the Faircloth Amendment, where you can't even build any new public housing.
Using HUD dollars.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, that was very misleading. But
no, that's true though. It's infuriating.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, with the Vienna model, it's just, we need to all be like thinking about how we're living together. So like, I don't know, one thing that I came across recently is just like looking at like the map of Austin by, I think it was like zip code or census tract, and like the median household income by census tract. And it's like, there are some parts of Austin that have a median household income of like $160,000. And it's just like, we can't have these like walled off enclaves of wealth. Like, this is bad for society to let rich people just segment themselves off from society. And like you see it again with like California. You hear these stories of these like little enclaves where Silicon Valley people are living, and then they end up like taking over the public school system, and then they just like maintain this like segregationist attitude, like keeping out as many poor people as they can as soon as they've like established their stake in that ground. So yeah, like the Vienna model of a social housing program for everyone, it's important. I mean, it's essential. You can't have housing justice, I think, without talking about integrating by economic and racial lines.
Yeah, I think there's definitely there's a lot there to really kind of think about. There, kind of specifically the way that public housing, I think it gets within the U.S. Framework, it gets racialized in a lot of ways.
It was very deliberately so.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And for a very long time, it was kind of associated with it still is associated with urban areas, even though the kind of irony is that there's now this kind of white flight back, like rich white flight back to the urban centers. It's displacing, traditional Black and brown communities. But yeah, I think that kind of idea of not letting it be kind of seen as charity, but instead being seen as a public good is something very interesting. Because, again, when we're talking about these nonprofit models, like these nonprofit models, they function with nonprofits function along the same kind of lines as capitalist corporations do, or capitalist companies do. There are some nonprofits that do very good work. Individually, but the nonprofit kind of framework leads to, there's a reason that we use the term nonprofit industrial complex, because it leads to these kind of outcomes where often at absolute best, nonprofits can provide this kind of charity, essentially this kind of like, oh, we're going to help you one time. We're going to give you the fish, but we're not going to teach you to fish. Or we're going to, get a bunch of grant money that says we're teaching you to fish, but ultimately we're giving you half a fish, or whatever the case is. I've done work in various nonprofits, and it's not much different than, any for-profit company, only more pretentious in a lot of ways. And then the other sort of thing there that I think bears mentioning is that as long as it's the essential division of classes exists in society, it's going to lead to this stratification, I think. And I think that's the kind of the other point you were getting at in some ways, where where, if there's this kind of public housing for kind of the poorest segments of society, but then kind of the richer segments live in essentially the extravagant wealth that they can buy with private housing, that still is going to lead, along with the other kind of mechanisms of exploitation, as long as there's sort of this capitalist framework in place where an individual person can accumulate infinite wealth in one way or another, however it is that's set up, that will eventually over and over again kind of lead to the erosion of, it'll lead to the erosion of kind of whatever welfare state is in place, whether by kind of purposeful neglect, whether by the fact that, the subsidies may not be as much as they used to be. So that's one of the criticisms within the article, is the criticism of kind of this subsidy model for quote unquote affordable housing, which we know does not, like, the word affordable is like a huge kind of red flag. Yeah. Whenever you see the word affordable in housing proposals, it usually is not affordable. And so I think as long as that structure is in place, where essentially there's that ability for a class of people separate from other classes in society to accumulate infinite wealth, we will see over and over again that kind of erosion of these kind of social safety nets, whether it's housing, whether it's transportation, whether it's Social Security, whatever the case is, that like the root of that kind of inequality is that exploitation model, is what it seems like to me. Yeah.
I think the Keeanga-Yamada Taylor piece that we discussed last time Maddie and me were on the show, about how the real estate industry segregated America, I think is very very, very relevant to this discussion, because in that piece, Keeanga-Yamada Taylor was kind of outlining the history of how the real estate industry very deliberately went about racially segregating America, using housing as a vehicle to do so. And so I think the sort of TLDR that I give people on that history is just that the right, the right wing politically of America right now, they're trying to do to public schools exactly what they did to public housing, which is, you cut the funding, you sabotage it, and then you point at it and you say, look, the government can't do anything well, so we should privatize this. And I think that if we're willing to learn from the history of public housing, maybe we can also save the beloved institution of public schools, which are not, doing as well as competitively as other public schools, as other public institutions, but you can just follow the money on that, right? Like if we funded our public school system anywhere near as much as we funded like the military or anything else, we'd be in much better shape. But that's a discussion for another day. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many intersections with housing. There are racial intersections, there are environmental intersections, and a public housing approach where we are deliberately saying, no, rich people, you do not get to live in your own little enclaves. This project means that you don't get to say, I don't want poor people in my neighborhood. This is you and your poor neighbors and your middle income neighbors and everybody living together in the same place. And I think that that's tremendously important for a lot of reasons. Like, I remember I watched this documentary where they were talking about the happiest people on earth as opposed to the least happy people. They looked at it on a sort of national by national, country by country basis. And one of the countries that they went to was Denmark. So not Vienna, but, very, very close by and having a sort of similar robust public housing infrastructure. And they went into public housing projects in Denmark, and they found these just very, very prosperous communities of people, very diverse in terms of you would have older pensioners who are no longer working and single moms and college students. And they were all living together in ways that were very mutually beneficial. They split up the responsibility of preparing dinner for the entire building, every night. So you would basically cook dinner for everybody twice a month or something like that. So that makes, the amount of domestic work on, say, the single mother is much, much less heavy than it would be otherwise. And then if the mom has to run out and get groceries or run an errand, she can leave her kids with the elderly folks. So there are just a lot of ways where whenever you actually build diverse communities intentionally, there are just all these like intangible positive outcomes that create material good in people's lives.
Capitalism is not prioritizing the thriving of the human soul in the way it constructs housing. And it's just like, it's become such a cliche to be like, oh, nobody talks to their neighbors anymore. And it's like, maybe that's because we've been living under a right-wing like hell march for the last like 4 decades. Like, why can't people see that these things are related?
And structural.
It's not just that like millennials are rude. Like, I live in cooperative housing. I love seeing people every day and being like, yo, what's up? What you up to? Like, I've lived in a neighborhood that was kind of, or before this, I was living in a neighborhood that was super suburby, and like, I would try my best to wave at my neighbors, and they would like look the other way. Like, it's set up for paranoia and mistrust and like all out competition, and like, I mean, even just like if you want to get down to the grain of like, everything comes down to your housing value and everything. So like, you're gonna like inspect what your neighbors are doing, because if they're putting up funky stuff in there, I don't know. Yeah, that might be too much of a tangent, but
no, like HOAs and like requiring that everybody's lawn be grass and not any native plants, not anything that would like hold the soil together. Like, that's bad. That's just bad for the environment. It's bad for the soil. It's bad for the ecosystem. It's bad for the watershed, and it produces no value except for this totally contrived like aesthetic value. It drives me bananas.
What is a lawn? Like,
it's so dumb. It's so dumb.
That is like, we could have an entire segment just on what is a lawn for real.
Oh my god. Oh yeah.
So if you're tuning in, you are listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. People's Republic originates out of KOOP 91.7 FM Austin. We are also available as a podcast on we're available. We also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans, and we're available as a podcast wherever podcasts are potted. We continue to be joined by Marina Roberts and Maddie Detelich of Austin Democratic Socialists for America. I guess we're going to keep this conversation rolling. Like, there's quite a bit of interesting stuff to talk about with regard to housing here. One thing that I think bears mentioning, among the many other things that bear mentioning, such as why we need to give Elon Musk $500 billion so he can finally solve all of our problems. No, please don't do that. But yeah, I wanted to bring up the ridiculous article I saw. I think it was from Fox 7 or one of these local stations. Every city everywhere, every small town everywhere has the same 3 local stations, all of which are owned by like Sinclair Media or whatever other Sinclair, like Sinclair adjacent corporation exists. Like, there are 5 corporations that own all of American media. Here we go. Fox 7 Austin. This was a ridiculous headline that I feel is worth mentioning. Tonight at 9, police say 4% of all crime in Austin happens in just a 2-mile radius of the Riverside Altorf area, and have introduced a new project aimed at fixing the problem. See more on Fox 7 Austin News at 9.
What is the solution, pray tell?
Honestly, I didn't tune in to Fox 7 Austin at 9.
No, I'm not doing this.
But, presumably, given Austin Police Department's solution to everything is more police, I'm just going to assume that was more police. But I think that's very, this is worth mentioning on an issue around housing because of just how already insecure housing is in this particular neighborhood. If, for those of you who are tuning in outside of Austin, the Riverside Altorf area is a kind of predominantly, Latinx neighborhood, a lot of Mexican population there. I lived there for quite a few years before it became sort of one of the front lines for gentrification here. Mm-hmm. And this somebody actually, also with Austin DSA, did the math on this and figured out that like they're saying, 4% of this, 4% of crime in Austin happens in this 2-mile radius. Well, if you do a 2-mile radius, that's actually 4.5% of the city.
Brain genius.
Yeah. So like this is actually a below average crime level area. And, but yet, police are using this as the excuse to essentially, when I was there, I saw this happen too, where they rounded up, They patrolled every single kind of street corner. They were the cops were always at every gas station, essentially waiting to criminalize people, waiting for somebody to do something that was slightly amiss, so that essentially they could criminalize the entire population of this area, so that then they could essentially clear the way, kind of blaze the trail or whatnot for primarily these kind of white yuppies working in the Silicon,
working at Oracle.
Working at the various kind of tech startups here and whatnot.
Oh, God, that just like so much. I mean, okay, I will say this is not the first time that APD has shown themselves to be like notoriously bad at math. I can't what was it? There was something about the statistics with the numbers of Black and brown people in Austin who were arrested or actually brought in on marijuana charges whenever we were debating the Freedom Cities policy. And they did some kind of funny thing where they were like, look, Black and brown people are a certain percentage of the population, and we're actually arresting them proportional to their percentage of the population, but their math was just incorrect. You could literally do the math and it was just not right. And it was kind of embarrassing. So,
well, I don't know if it was because they got away with it.
Yeah, they did. They did.
It will be embarrassing to a police department that had any accountability whatsoever.
Sure. That's a good point. That's a good point.
But yeah, they're able to just kind of get away with this stuff. I mean, Austin Police Department is notorious. They've had kind of scandals around rape kits not being tested for years and years. Then they had a scandal regarding the quote unquote exceptional clearance, where essentially they were falsely clearing well over 1,000 rape and sexual assault cases as having been quote unquote cleared when they never actually arrested anybody or brought any charges. In addition to that, of course, as you mentioned, they've, also had all sorts of disproportionate outcomes with regarding the way they over-police Black and brown neighborhoods. They just had the scandal regarding the arrest of the 13-year-old Black middle school student at an Austin public library. And the list goes on and on with APD.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think that's important because in order for these neighborhoods to be gentrified, like so many people consider gentrification, even the word gentrification to me doesn't capture what it is, which is a violent displacement of working class, usually Black and brown communities. And like that gentrification just sounds like such a nice and not
the coffee shops. It's about the coffee shops.
Yeah.
It's about kombucha.
Yeah. And it just, I don't know, to me, it is so connected in so many ways that in order for housing to become as inaffordable as it is, it requires this kind of state violence, this state sponsored violence against these working class communities in order to push them from places in order to push them from places where they can't afford rent.
I really want us to just expand the definition of violence to not be like broken glass in Ferguson, because that's a complete mischaracterization of what violence is. Violence is whenever you take away or withhold from human beings what they need to survive. That is violence. Mm-hmm. And eviction is violence.
So in that case, with that definition, denial of housing or denial of healthcare would absolutely be violence.
Yes.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many different angles to go here, but I just wanted to jump in with, we're talking about gentrification, and this piece pointed out kind of an interesting observation that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez started out, really won in her election really gained popularity in her district by talking about issues of gentrification and eviction and real estate. Or that Joe Crowley was funded by real estate people, and it's just so these are clearly widely felt. And then they were saying that they, and then now that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in office, kind of what she's now known for is this Green New Deal. And so the author was pointing out that like, that doesn't have to be like an accidental, that doesn't have to be like a pivot really. It really is part of this whole thing. And so when you're talking about gentrification and its intersection with the environment, it's like, so we do accept, at least the three of us here, and I'm hoping to convince more people that yeah, we can't get by without like making our cities more dense. Like Austin's sprawl and like reliance on traffic has to go. Something has to be done about that. And then so what happened? So that's already happening naturally because more people want to be living closer to the city center, closer to the vibrant live music capital of the world. And so like, where are they going to be building these luxury apartments? Well, it's where they can already build them. So it's like areas that were already zoned to have this dense housing. So that is the East Side. And that's where the Black and brown communities were. And it's just like, the Black and brown communities are bearing the brunt of that because this is happening naturally, but people have refused to allow it to seep into the white neighborhoods or the rich neighborhoods. We're not taking land from Tarrytown and building towers, even though that's just as close to downtown. We're taking land from Riverside and replacing dense housing with more dense housing, which is like, dang, priorities are really straight here. But but yeah, like we need to do this. And yeah, I guess it just like, it bums me out when I'm starting to think about gentrification involved with transforming the city because, we really have to be careful to make sure that we're not causing undue harm to communities that have been harmed so much already by the current system.
Just upzone the West Side.
Yeah.
Upzone the West Side. Like there was this one, DSA never did officially take a stance on the Code Next thing. And, God, we probably don't need to get into that because that would be a whole nother day. But like one of the things that one of our members came up with around maybe trying to integrate into that proposal, if we were going to take a stance and make some recommendations around it, was this thing called affordability triggers, where like you look at the different areas of Austin, and if there's an area of Austin with no affordable housing, then it automatically gets upzoned, which would kind of prioritize upzoning the parts of Austin that are already the least accessible to middle and low income people, if you think about it. And of course, I don't know what kind of like political battle it would take to make something like that a reality. But if we're talking about just logically where we need to put the affordable housing, we probably need to start with the places that have the least amount of affordable housing right now. But again, rich people don't want poor people in their neighborhoods. They have said this to me verbatim. So I just, overcoming that resistance.
An apartment complex is going to cause crime in my neighborhood.
Oh, jeez.
Actually, the lack of affordable housing is going to be more correlated with crime. But
yeah, you don't want just any neighborhood to become the crime-ridden neighborhood of Riverside and Oldorf.
Yeah,
with all 4.5 for the lawless.
4% of all crime in Austin happens in this neighborhood. That's 4.5% of the city.
I know, yeah. And
yeah, go ahead.
4% doesn't even sound like a big number on the face of it even. So it's like, wow, people are really swayed by fancy numbers.
Do they count like tax fraud? Like, do they count these like white collar crimes? I'm just curious. Where is that happening?
Yeah, the white collar crimes, like and I've said this before, but if you want to see what powers the cops protect and serve, try calling the cops on your landlord for a violation of your tenant's rights and see who gets carried away in handcuffs at the end of that scuffle. And you'll see who the cops protect and serve there. Mm-hmm. So it's, that is what that is. And yeah, as far as the Code Next thing, like I can't really claim to be much of a policy wonk in regards to the kind of density proposals or whatnot, but I could tell very much that like Code Next, the kind of debates that are happening around it were not really. Even the most well-intentioned seem to be missing a lot of the forest from the trees in regard to this is not something that kind of, when we're talking about housing, it's not something that can be solved simply with these kind of like minor policy tweaks. Like there's something fundamentally within the very heart of our economic system, broadly speaking, that commodifies everything, that turns housing into a commodity, that turns, healthcare. Land,
our natural resources,
that thing called capitalism that turns all of these things into commodities. And that's why, if you look at Marx's Capital, Volume 1, the three biggest chapters, the three chapters that most people kind of struggle getting into are the first three chapters because they're the ones that lay out the entire basis of the thing. It's not capital. It's not about sort of the accumulation of, the means of production. But in fact, Marx's kind of base theory there revolves around what is the commodity. And so he centers that commodity is sort of the basis for, the production of the commodity is the basis for all of this, essentially all this exploitation and oppression. It all comes down to, how do we like produce the most commodities? How do we like squeeze the most money out of this thing? And we're at a point once again where it is more clear, I think, to most people how unsustainable this entire thing is. I'm very glad to have had this conversation. And, of course, I personally believe we just need to like hand once again Elon Musk hundreds of billions of dollars so he can just rocket into space.
Let your workers unionize, you punk.
Save 20 minutes. Don't read that Jacobin piece. Just go post about Elon Musk.
Just hand Elon Musk all of whatever public assets are left. And
call him a chump to his face.
You'll just solve everything. Anyway, no, seriously though, that was, very, very insightful. I really appreciate this segment, and housing it remains such an important thing, obviously, for everybody. My kind of last comment would be just thinking about the fact that Americans do tend to be so atomized. But one of the things that within most of the 20th century that kind of leftists in other parts of the world, socialists in other parts of the world commented on sort of the American left is this tendency to kind of remain so dormant and complacent for long, long periods of time, and then just to explode into sort of, into action, into real kind of militant action in kind of a very unique way. I think that's unique to the American system, and I think we're nearing that tipping point. I don't think anything's ever inevitable. It's not sort of inevitable that we'll once again reach that point, but I think it's very sort of interesting to see how this is how there has been kind of this radical shift in kind of consciousness around these issues. And I think this segment is very useful for being able to kind of continue to explore how people's consciousness has changed and how sort of the conversation continues to change around what housing should be. Of course, we understand here housing to be a human right that needs to be decommodified. I think more and more people are seeing that. So we'll continue to follow this. We have been joined by Marina Roberts and Maddie Detelich of Austin Democratic Socialists of America for this regular segment on housing. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you both very much for coming on once again.
Thanks so much for having us, Brian.
Thank you. And two platitudes: trend is not destiny, and private sufficiency, public luxury. These are things to keep in mind.
Yes. That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. People's Republic is produced at KOOP Community Radio in Austin, Texas, and is also syndicated on WHIV 102.3 FM in New Orleans. You can find our show on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spreaker, Spotify, and Stitcher by typing in People's Republic, or you can visit us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX. Thanks for listening as we report on the global struggle for social and economic justice. We are out of here.